The flash of a smartphone camera, the soft chime of a social media notification, and a single three-word post that detonated a new mother's world. In the sterile, quiet peace of a maternity ward, while Isabella Rossi held their newborn son Leo, for the very first time her husband Marcus Thorne was celebrating his own kind of delivery. He typed the words, "free at last," into the digital ether, a triumphant cry for all their friends and family to see. He thought it was a joke. He thought it was harmless. By the time the sun rose the next morning, he would learn in the most brutal way possible that his freedom had just cost him everything. The air in room 304 of St. Jude's Medical Center was thick with a sacred silence. It was 2:17 a.m., a time when the world outside held its breath, but inside this small, sanitized space, a new world had just begun. Isabella Rossi, her body a beautiful aching testament to the marathon of childbirth, held her son Leo against her chest. His tiny wrinkled fingers were curled around her thumb, his breath a warm, rhythmic puff against her skin. Every cliché she had ever rolled her eyes at was suddenly overwhelmingly true. The rush of love was a tidal wave wiping away the memory of pain, the exhaustion, the fear. There was only this perfect, fragile 7-pound, 3-ounce universe in her arms. Marcus was on the other side of the room, a hulking, joyous silhouette against the dim glow of the city lights filtering through the window. He'd been a rock, a surprisingly steady presence through the 17 hours of labor. He'd held her hand, fed her ice chips, and whispered encouragement when her resolve faltered. He'd wept when Leo's first cry cut through the tension in the delivery room. Now he was buzzing with a different kind of energy, a restless, kinetic hum. I'm gonna let everyone know he's here," Marcus had said, his voice husky with emotion. "Gotta update the family. They've been blowing up my phone." Isabella had simply nodded, too lost in the milky scent of her newborn to truly register the words. She heard the soft clicks of his phone's keyboard, saw the familiar blue-white light illuminate his face. She smiled faintly. Let him have his moment. He was a father. They were a family. She drifted in a haze of oxytocin and fatigue, her world shrinking to the rise and fall of Leo's chest. A nurse, a kind woman named Carol with gentle hands and a softer voice, came in to check her vitals. Everything was a gentle murmur, a soft, focused dream. It wasn't until Carol had left and the room had settled back into its quiet hum that Isabella's own phone lying on the bedside table buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again. A cascade of notifications, insistent and sharp. Curiosity, faint at first, pricked through her blissful fog. Maybe it was her sister Sophia, who was on a flight back from a work trip in London and desperate for news. With a tired grunt, Isabella shifted Leo slightly and reached for the device. Her thumb, clumsy with fatigue, swiped the screen open. The notifications were from Facebook, Instagram, a dozen different group chats. The first thing she saw was a photo. It was a selfie Marcus had taken just moments ago. He was grinning a wild, almost manic grin, his hair disheveled, his eyes wide with adrenaline. In the background, out of focus, was the back of her head and the swaddled bundle of their son. It was the caption, however, that made the air in her lungs turn to ice. 3 simple words floating innocently above the image. Free at last. Isabella stared. She read the words once, twice, a third time. There had to be a mistake, a typo, an autocorrect error of catastrophic proportions. Free. What was he free from? The pregnancy. The waiting her. Their son. Her heart began to beat a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. The sacred silence of the room was shattered by the roaring in her ears. She clicked on the post to see the comments, a masochistic impulse she couldn't control. His college buddy Kevin had commented, "Ha ha ha, the old ball and chain finally delivered. Welcome to the other side, man." A cousin she barely knew. Brenda wrote, "Oh, Marcus, that's not a very nice thing to say about your wife and new baby," followed by a string of laughing emojis. But it was the comment from Chloe Vance that felt like a physical blow. Chloe, his business partner, the woman whose name had appeared on his phone at all hours for the last 6 months. The woman he'd sworn was just a colleague, a brilliant tech mind who was helping him launch his new venture. Chloe had written congratulations on closing the biggest deal of your life. Both of them. The winking emoji was a tiny digital dagger. Isabella's breath hitched. A cold dread far more chilling than any labor pain seeped into her bones. The late-night meetings, the hushed phone calls he'd take in the other room. The sudden business trips on weekends. She had pushed her suspicions down, chalking them up to her own hormonal anxiety, her insecurity about her changing body. She had trusted him. She had chosen to believe in the man who had held her hand and cried at the birth of their son. And he had posted this, for the world to see. He hadn't posted, "Meet our beautiful son Leo." He hadn't posted, "Isabella was a warrior." He had posted a triumphant cry of liberation, a joke shared with another woman about a deal. What deal? What could possibly compete with the birth of his child? She looked across the room. Marcus was oblivious, still scrolling through his phone, a self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. He was in his own world, celebrating a victory she wasn't privy to. He was a stranger. The wave of love she'd felt for him just minutes before receded, leaving behind a barren, frozen shore. The warmth in her chest was gone, replaced by a glacial calm. Her mind, usually a whirlwind of emotion, became sharp and clear, honed to a single point of purpose. She had a background in forensic accounting, a career she'd put on hold to start a family. She knew numbers, she knew contracts, she knew how to protect assets. And she knew that the bulk of their shared finances, the down payment on their house, their savings, their investment portfolio was tied to the inheritance her grandmother had left her. An inheritance that was in a joint account, but one for which she was the primary signatory. An old piece of advice from her father, a notoriously shrewd and cynical businessman, echoed in her mind. Isabella, in love and in business, never leave yourself exposed. Hope for the best, but structure for the worst. She had hoped for the best. Now she had to structure for the worst. While Marcus was basking in the glow of his mysterious freedom, Isabella Rossi, new mother, betrayed wife, began to work. Her fingers, no longer clumsy, moved with precision across her phone's screen. She opened her banking app. She navigated through security protocols and two-factor authentications. Her face, illuminated by the screen, was a mask of cold resolve. She found the master account, the one from which all others, his personal checking, his business credit card, their joint savings, were fed. She saw the option she was looking for: initiate full security freeze. A temporary measure designed for suspected fraud. It would lock every cent, block every transaction, deny every withdrawal. It would take a phone call to a 24-hour premium service line to make it ironclad. With Leo sleeping soundly on her chest, his innocence a stark contrast to the calculated act she was about to commit, Isabella pressed the button. A confirmation screen appeared. "Are you sure you want to freeze all activity on these accounts?" She didn't hesitate. She pressed confirm. Then she picked up her phone and began to dial the number for the bank's Platinum Fraud Protection Services. A soft, automated voice answered on the other end. "Thank you for calling Sterling Financial's Premium Client Services," the voice chirped. "All our representatives are currently busy. Your estimated wait time is 10 minutes. Isabella leaned her head back against the stiff hospital pillows and closed her eyes. The phone pressed to her ear. 10 minutes. She had all the time in the world. Marcus had his freedom. She was about to give him a taste of what it truly meant. The first rays of dawn painted the gray city skyline in hues of soft pink and orange. But inside room 304, the atmosphere remained stubbornly frozen. Isabella had barely slept. She had dozed in fits and starts, her body demanding rest, while her mind replayed the 3-word caption and Chloe's winking emoji on an endless, torturous loop. Each time she woke, the first thing she felt was the solid weight of betrayal, a physical presence in the room. Her call to the bank had been swift and clinical. She'd used the right keywords: unauthorized activity, potential. Third-party compromise, spousal financial malfeasance, and the representative professionally alarmed had erected a digital fortress around their assets that would require a court order and 3 blood oaths to penetrate. Marcus, on the other hand, had slept like a log. He was sprawled in the uncomfortable recliner, snoring softly, his phone lying on his chest. He looked peaceful, innocent. The image was so discordant with the chaos he had unleashed that Isabella felt a fresh wave of sickness roll through her. When he finally stirred, it was with a groan and a stretch, a man waking from a satisfying sleep. He blinked, looked at Isabella and the sleeping baby in the bassinet beside her bed, and a dopey, happy grin spread across his face. "Morning, Mama," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "How are my 2 favorite people in the world?" Isabella just looked at him. Her expression was utterly blank. The warmth he expected, the shared smile of new parents, wasn't there. There was just a flat, dispassionate stare. He seemed to notice the chill. "You okay? You look tired." "I am tired," she said, her voice monotone. "Right, of course. Stupid question." He rubbed his face, trying to wake himself up. "I'm going to go get you the best coffee in a 5-mile radius, and one of those giant croissants from that French place. You deserve it. You deserve everything." He leaned over to kiss her, but she subtly turned her head so his lips met her cheek. It was a small, almost imperceptible rejection, but it stopped him cold. He asked, his brow furrowing. "What's wrong?" "Just go get the coffee, Marcus," she said. Her eyes focused on Leo. Puzzled but undeterred, he grabbed his wallet and keys. "Okay, back in a flash. Don't miss me too much." He blew a kiss and slipped out the door. Isabella waited. She counted the seconds. She knew exactly what was about to happen. 30 minutes later, Marcus returned. He was not carrying coffee or a croissant. His face, which had been full of dopey joy, was now a mask of confusion and irritation. "This is so weird," he said, slamming his wallet on the small table. "My card was declined." Isabella didn't look at him. "Oh yeah. The debit card. Declined. So I tried the Amex. Declined. Tried the Visa. Declined." The barista looked at me like I was a complete deadbeat. I had to pay with the emergency 20 I keep in my phone case. What the hell is going on? Did you get a fraud alert or something? Now she turned to look at him. Her gaze was steady and cold. "Yes," she said. "I did." He let out a relieved sigh. "Oh, thank God. I thought I was going crazy." "So you sorted it out?" "I sorted it out," she confirmed. She picked up her phone from the bedside table and held it out to him. His Facebook page was still open. The post was right there now with over 100 likes and dozens of comments. "What am I looking at?" he asked, confused. "Read it," she commanded. He squinted at the screen. "Free at last." "Yeah, it's funny, right? A little gallows humor after 17 hours of—" His voice trailed off as he saw the look on her face. It was not the face of a woman who found anything funny. "Funny," she repeated, her voice dangerously low. "You thought that was funny, Marcus. You thought broadcasting to every single person we know that you felt free the moment your son was born was funny." He finally started to grasp the magnitude of his error. A panicked look flashed in his eyes. "Oh, babe, no. It was just a joke. A stupid joke. It didn't mean anything. You know, like free from the waiting. That's all. Is that what Chloe Vance thought it meant?" Isabella shot back, her voice like cracking ice. Or was she in on the joke with her little winking face? "Congratulations on closing the biggest deal of your life. Both of them." "What deal, Marcus? What was the other big deal you closed last night while I was pushing your son out of my body?" Marcus's face went pale. "Chloe." "That was about work. Project Chimera. It finally got funded yesterday. The term sheets were signed while you were in labor. That's the deal." That's all she meant. It's what I've been working on for 2 years. It's for us. For our future. Our future. Isabella let out a laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that held no humor. You mean the future you were so happy to be free from? You stood there in this room while I was holding our baby for the first time, and you weren't celebrating with me. You were celebrating with her. You made the birth of our son a footnote in your business announcement. That's not true, he pleaded, his voice rising in desperation. I was overwhelmed. I was happy about everything. Leo, the deal. It all happened at once. I wasn't thinking straight. No. For the first time I think you were, Isabella said, her calm returning. You showed me exactly what your priorities are. And so, I've decided to set my own. What does that mean? He asked, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Why were my cards declined? Because I froze them, she stated as if discussing the weather. All of them. The checking accounts, the savings, the credit cards you pay off from the joint account, the one that's funded by my inheritance. Every single dollar is locked up. He stared at her, his mouth agape. He looked like she had just confessed to a murder. You what? You can't do that. That's our money. No, Marcus, she corrected him, her voice precise and cutting. It's my money that you have had the privilege of accessing. A privilege you have demonstrated you no longer deserve. You want to be free at last. Congratulations, you're free. Free from any and all financial support from me. Now get out. Get out, he stammered. Isabella, this is insane. I'm the father of your child. We just had a baby. And you sullied it. She whispered, the mask of calm cracking for just a second to reveal the raw wound beneath. You took the most sacred moment of my life, and you defaced it with a cheap joke and a secret celebration. I don't know who you are right now, and I will not have you in this room. I'm not leaving you. You are, she said, her voice regaining its steel. She reached for the call button to summon the nurse. If you don't walk out of that door in the next 10 seconds, I will have security escort you out. And I will tell them I am in fear for my safety. Do you really want to add that to your list of accomplishments from last night? The threat hung in the air, ugly and potent. He looked at her, truly, looked at her, and saw no trace of the woman he thought he knew. The warm, loving Isabella was gone. In her place was a stranger with eyes of ice and a will of iron. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, a trait she'd inherited from her formidable father, Lorenzo Rossi, and knew he had lost. For now. Defeated, humiliated, and utterly bewildered, Marcus Thorne backed away. He grabbed his wallet and keys, his movements stiff and jerky. He opened the door, paused, and looked back at her one last time. I will fix this. He vowed, his voice cracking. I will make you understand. She didn't answer. She had already turned away from him, her attention focused entirely on the tiny sleeping baby in the bassinet, the only family she could trust right now. The door clicked shut, leaving Marcus alone in the hallway, a free man with empty pockets and a life in ruins. The fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway seemed unnaturally bright, buzzing with an accusatory hum. Marcus stood there for a long moment, the click of the closing door echoing in his ears. He felt like he'd been hit by a bus he never saw coming. 1 minute he was on top of the world, a new father and a successful entrepreneur on the cusp of greatness. The next he was exiled, broke, and accused of, he wasn't even sure what. Betrayal, insensitivity, financial malfeasance. It was all a tangled, horrifying mess. His first instinct was to panic. Project Chimera, his AI-driven logistics software, had just secured its second round of funding. The deal was done, but the initial capital transfer to cover immediate operational costs, server rentals, developer salaries, a down payment on a new office space was supposed to come from their joint savings. It was a bridge fund, a few $100,000 he needed now before the venture capital money was formally wired in a week. Without it, he would be in breach of his new partnership agreement. He would look like a fool, or worse, a fraud. He would lose everything he'd worked for. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking, and scrolled to his banking app. Isabella hadn't been exaggerating. Every account was flagged with a bright red banner. Account frozen. Contact institution. He was locked out. Completely. He needed an ally, a voice of reason. He dialed his best friend David Chen. David was a level-headed corporate lawyer, the yin to Marcus's often impulsive yang. Dave, Marcus said, his voice ragged. I've screwed up. I've screwed up in a way that might be like historically bad. Marcus, what's wrong? Is the baby okay? Is Isabella okay? The baby's perfect. Isabella is, she's declared war on me. Pacing the hallway, Marcus recounted the entire story. The birth, the elation, the post, the comment from Chloe, the confrontation, the frozen accounts. He relayed it all from his perspective, a monumentally stupid but innocent mistake that had been blown into a declaration of marital treason. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Dave, you there? Yeah, I'm here, David said slowly. I'm just processing the sheer unadulterated stupidity of what you did. Marcus, let me get this straight. Your wife, after 17 hours of labor, is holding your newborn child for the first time, and you post a selfie with the caption, "Free at last." It was a joke, Marcus insisted, his voice cracking. To who? For who? What part of that is funny? David's voice was uncharacteristically sharp. Forget the money for a second. Put yourself in her shoes. She's exhausted, hormonal, vulnerable, and probably feeling a love so overwhelming it's terrifying. And the first thing she sees from her partner, her co-pilot in this, is a public declaration of his own liberation. It's not just insensitive, man. It's cruel. It communicates that while she was going through a life-altering, body-altering ordeal, you saw it as a prison sentence you just got paroled from. Marcus leaned his head against the cool wall of the corridor. Hearing it from David, stripped of his own self-justification, made it sound so much worse. I didn't mean it like that. It doesn't matter what you meant. It matters what you did. And this Chloe person commenting with a winky face. Marcus, what were you thinking? You've been telling Izzy for months that Chloe is just a colleague. And then this. It's a mountain of circumstantial evidence, and you handed it to her on a silver platter. So what do I do? Marcus asked, his desperation mounting. The money, Dave. The Chimera deal will collapse if I can't access that capital. Forget Chimera, David said firmly. Chimera is a symptom, not the disease. You don't have a financial problem right now. You have a trust problem. You don't go to her asking for money. You go to her begging for forgiveness. You need to stop thinking like a CEO trying to solve a cash flow issue and start thinking like a husband who just shattered his wife's heart. Meanwhile, in the quiet sanctuary of room 304, Isabella was fortifying her defenses. The first person she called after Marcus left was her older sister, Sophia. Sophia Rossi was a partner at a top-tier litigation firm in New York. She was sharp, fiercely protective, and possessed a near-pathological intolerance for nonsense, especially from men who hurt her little sister. Isabella, her voice trembling but determined, told her everything. She didn't have to embellish. The facts were damning enough. He did what Sophia's voice crackled with rage over the phone. I'm booking the next flight to you. No screw that I'm chartering a plane. I'll be there in 5 hours. Soph, you don't have to. The hell I don't. Sophia cut her off. Isabella, you did absolutely the right thing by freezing the accounts. Absolutely. In fact, it might not be enough. Did you know the seed money for his little project Chimera came from that portfolio Grandma left us? I knew he invested some of it. Yes, Isabella admitted. He leveraged a significant portion of it. I looked into it a few months ago because I didn't like the sound of it. And who is this Chloe Vance? Send me her full name. Isabella did. Within 30 minutes, Sophia's network was at work. She had a private investigator she kept on retainer for contentious divorce cases do a deep dive. The initial report came back while Isabella was trying to get Leo to latch for a feeding. "Okay, listen to this," Sophia said, her voice grim. Chloe Vance, co-founder and CTO of Thorn Dynamics, which is the official name of his company. They registered it 6 months ago. Before that, she was fired from a major tech firm for, get this, an inappropriate relationship with a senior executive. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. It was settled out of court with an NDA, but the investigator has his sources. Furthermore, I'm looking at travel manifests. Marcus took a business trip to a tech conference in Austin 3 months ago. Guess who was also registered as an attendee and staying at the same hotel? Chloe Vance. There are photos on the conference website of a cocktail reception. They're standing very close together. He has his hand on the small of her back. Each word was another shovelful of dirt on the grave of her marriage. Every lie, every half-truth, every time he'd said, "Don't worry, it's just work," now felt like a deliberate, calculated deception. The social media post wasn't a mistake. It was a Freudian slip of epic proportions. He was celebrating his new life, a life with a successful business, and very possibly a new partner to go with it. Just then, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number she dreaded and revered in equal measure, her father, Lorenzo Rossi. Sophia must have called him. "Isabella," his voice boomed, a force of nature that had intimidated CEOs and politicians for 40 years. "Sophia told me. I'm sending my jet. Pack your things. You and my grandson are coming home to New York. As for that boy you married, my lawyers will descend on him so fast he won't have time to update his Facebook status. We will gut him. We will take his company, his reputation, everything. He will be lucky to get a job cleaning toilets." "Papa, wait." Isabella said, her head spinning. The force of her family's protective rage was a comfort, but it was also suffocating. "Leo can't travel yet. I need a minute to think." "There is nothing to think about," Lorenzo thundered. "He humiliated you. He humiliated our family. You cut out the cancer before it spreads. That is what we do. Papa, please." Isabella begged, tears finally starting to well in her eyes. "Just give me a day. I need to handle this my way first." There was a long, disapproving sigh on the other end. "Fine. You have 24 hours to be sensible. Then I handle it my way. I love you, my daughter. Be strong." He hung up. Isabella sat there, the weight of it all pressing down on her. Her husband's betrayal, her sister's righteous fury, her father's promise of annihilation. And in the middle of this swirling vortex was tiny, perfect Leo sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the war being waged around him. She looked at the preliminary report from Sophia's investigator again. The photo from the Austin conference. Marcus's hand on Chloe's back. It was so casual, so proprietary. The freeze on the accounts no longer felt like an act of anger. It felt like an act of survival. David Chin had been wrong. This wasn't just a trust problem. It was a financial problem, a legal problem, and a deeply personal one. And Isabella was beginning to realize the web of suspicion was far more tangled and venomous than even she had imagined. Humbled and terrified, Marcus spent the next 12 hours in a self-imposed exile at a cheap motel near the airport, paid for with the last of his emergency cash. The garish floral bedspread and the constant roar of jet engines were a fitting backdrop for the wreckage of his life. David's words had hit their mark. He had been an idiot, a colossal, self-absorbed fool. His focus on the Chimera deal had been so all-consuming that he'd developed a dangerous tunnel vision, seeing his family not as the reason for his ambition, but as something that existed on a parallel track to it. He knew explaining wouldn't be enough. Apologies were just words, and he had already shown how little his words could be trusted. He had to show her. He had to prove that Project Chimera wasn't some sordid secret life with Chloe, but a legitimate, albeit all-consuming venture meant to secure their future. He spent the rest of the day gathering his ammunition. He drove to his small shared office space, a place Isabella had never visited, and began printing documents. The articles of incorporation for Thorne Dynamics, the detailed business plan he'd spent a year perfecting, the complex schematics for the AI routing algorithm, and most importantly, the entire 200-page venture capital funding agreement with Sterling March Capital. He printed out email chains with the investors' communication logs and the final signed term sheets that had arrived at 1:30 a.m. less than an hour before Leo was born. He even printed his and Chloe's travel receipts from the Austin conference showing they were in separate rooms on different floors, a flimsy defense perhaps. But it was all he had. He organized everything into a heavy 3-ring binder, a physical manifestation of his supposed truth. It was his grand gesture, his only hope. By evening, he was back at the hospital. He felt like a condemned man walking to his own execution. He took a deep breath and knocked softly on the door to room 304. It was Isabella who answered, not a nurse. She was out of bed, moving slowly, but with a newfound strength. Her face was pale. Her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, but the cold resolve was still there. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked, her voice flat. She made no move to let him in. I didn't come to ask for anything," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual confidence. "Not for money, not even for you to let me in. I need you to see this. I need you to understand what the deal was." He held out the heavy binder. "Everything is in here. The business plan, the contracts, the emails. Chloe is the CTO. She built the core technology. I handle the business and fundraising. That's it. That's all it is. I was under immense pressure. The investors were about to walk. We finally got them to sign last night right before Leo came. I was euphoric and stupid. And I posted that awful thing without thinking about how it would look, how it would hurt you. It was about being free from the fear of failure not from you. Never from you." He saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not forgiveness, but a sliver of curiosity. She hesitated, then took the heavy binder from him. "I'll look at it," she said, her tone non-committal. "That's all I can promise." She closed the door, leaving him once again alone in the hallway. Inside the room, Isabella sat down heavily in the recliner Marcus had occupied the night before. Her sister Sophia had arrived an hour ago, a whirlwind of expensive luggage and righteous anger. She was currently holding Leo, glaring at the door as if she could incinerate Marcus with her gaze alone. "What is that?" Sophia demanded, nodding at the binder. "His explanation," Isabella said, placing it on the small table. She felt a strange reluctance to open it. Part of her wanted her suspicions to be true to justify the clean, righteous anger she felt. But a deeper part, a part that still remembered the man she had loved, desperately wanted him to be telling the truth. With a deep breath, she opened the binder. For the next hour, she read. Sophia watched her silent and skeptical. Isabella's training in forensic accounting took over. She scanned the documents not with the eyes of a wounded wife, but with the dispassionate scrutiny of an auditor. And to her growing surprise, it all seemed to be there. The company was real. The technology, from what she could understand of it, seemed genuinely innovative. The funding agreement with Sterling March was legitimate and substantial. The email chains documented a grueling, high-stakes negotiation. His story, as outlandish as it seemed, was starting to hold water. The post was still unforgivable, a moment of supreme narcissistic folly, but perhaps it wasn't born of infidelity. Perhaps it was born of a different kind of obsession. It actually looks legitimate, Isabella murmured, a wave of confusion washing over her. She felt the hard certainty of her anger beginning to soften at the edges. "Don't let a pile of paper fool you," Izzy, Sophia warned. "Con men are always good with paperwork." Isabella continued to flip through the pages, her eyes scanning lines of legal and financial jargon. She reached a section detailing the bridge financing Marcus had needed to secure the VC deal. It outlined the short-term loan required to prove liquidity to the investors. She read the paragraph, then read it again. And then she saw it. a single line item under the heading collateral. It wasn't their investment portfolio. It wasn't stock options. It was a property address. The address of the beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house in the suburbs that they were set to close on in 2 weeks. The house that was supposed to be Leo's home. The house whose down payment had been paid for entirely by a gift from her father, a gift given to her with the deed to be in both their names, only after the marriage was on solid footing. She felt the air leave her lungs. The document was a loan agreement, not with a bank, but with a private lender signed 2 weeks ago. Marcus had forged her signature on the preliminary documents and used the equity from her father's gift, their future home, as collateral to secure a high-interest, short-term loan for his business, without telling her. This was the true betrayal. The social media post was a matchstick. This was a forest fire. The post was a public humiliation, a thoughtless, cruel act. This was a calculated deception that put the roof over their child's head at risk. He hadn't just gambled with his own future. He had gambled with hers and with Leo's. He had taken the one thing that represented stability and safety and secretly pushed it onto the poker table. The binder slipped from her trembling hands and fell to the floor with a heavy thud. The sound startled Leo, who began to cry. Sophia rushed to her side. "Izzy, what is it? What did you find?" Isabella couldn't speak. She could only point a shaking finger at the scattered pages on the floor. Her face was a mask of utter devastation. The cold, calculated anger from the night before was gone, replaced by the profound, soul-crushing agony of a trust so completely and fundamentally shattered that it could never be repaired. He hadn't just posted something stupid. He had lied. He had committed fraud. He had taken her faith in him and used it as leverage. The frozen accounts were no longer an overreaction. They were a chillingly prescient move. She had saved them from a ruin he had secretly orchestrated. The man she had married wasn't just an insensitive fool. He was a liar and a thief who had stolen from his own family. And she, Isabella Rossi, had just uncovered the real crime. The calm that had defined Isabella for the past day was gone, obliterated by the discovery of Marcus's ultimate deception. A storm of pure, unadulterated rage took its place. She was no longer just a hurt wife. She was a protector whose entire domain had been threatened from within. She picked up her phone, her hands steady now with furious purpose, and sent Marcus a single text message. "Get back here. Now." When Marcus arrived, breathless and hopeful, he found a scene from his worst nightmares. Isabella was standing in the middle of the room, her face white with fury. Sophia stood behind her like a royal guard, cradling a now calm Leo, her expression one of utter contempt. On the floor, spread out like the scene of a crime, were the pages from his binder with the collateral agreement sitting squarely in the middle. "You wanted me to understand, Marcus." Isabella began, her voice low and trembling with contained violence. "Oh, I understand now. I understand everything. The post, the secrecy, the desperation. It all makes sense." She kicked the offending page with her foot. "Explain this." Marcus looked down and saw the loan agreement. The color drained from his face. Of all the documents, that was the one he had prayed she would overlook, a detail buried in the fine print that he could deal with later once the VC money came in and he could pay it off quietly. "I can explain," he stammered. "Can you?" She shot back, her voice rising. "Can you explain forging my signature? Can you explain taking the gift from my father, the home we were supposed to bring our son to, and gambling it on your little project? You didn't just lie to me, Marcus. You committed a crime against me, against us. It was a bridge loan, a formality," he pleaded, his voice desperate. "The VC money was guaranteed. I was going to pay it back this week, and you would have never even known. It was the only way to get the deal done to secure our future." "Our future!" she shrieked, the sound raw and painful. "You think a future built on a foundation of lies and fraud is secure? You stood there day after day talking about nursery colors and picking out furniture with me, all while knowing you had put a lien on our child's home. You let me believe we were partners, but we weren't. I was just another asset for you to leverage. Sophia stepped forward. I've already spoken to my legal team, Marcus. What you did constitutes financial fraud and forgery. Isabella has grounds not only for divorce but for criminal charges. Marcus felt the floor drop out from beneath him. Criminal charges. Isabella, I did it for us. I swear. I was so afraid of failing, of not being able to provide for you and Leo. I saw this one chance, this one shot to make it all work, and I took it. It was wrong. It was arrogant. It was stupid. But my heart was in the right place. I swear it. Your heart. Isabella laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. Your heart was in your wallet, Marcus. It was with your ambition. It was with Chloe Vance and Project Chimera. It was never, ever with us. As if on cue, Marcus's phone began to ring. The caller ID read Sterling March Capital. He looked at the phone in horror. It was the lead investor, Jonathan Sterling. Don't you dare answer that in here, Isabella hissed. But it was too late. His phone buzzed again, this time with a text. He glanced at it. Marcus' wire for initial capital injection was rejected. Funds frozen. You are in breach of Section 4B of the agreement. You have 24 hours to rectify or we are pulling out and our legal team will be in touch regarding damages. Fix this. The final domino had fallen. The entire deal, his 2 years of work, was about to implode because he couldn't access the money he had promised. The money Isabella controlled. He looked at her, his face a portrait of utter desperation. Please. Everything, my entire life's work will be gone. They'll sue me into oblivion. We'll lose the house anyway because of the penalties in the contract. Please, you have to unfreeze the accounts, just for this one transfer. I'm begging you. It was the ultimate bitter irony. The free man was now a prisoner, and his wife, the one he had so carelessly disregarded, was his only jailer and his only hope for a pardon. Before Isabella could answer, the door to the hospital room swung open with force. Lorenzo Rossi stood there flanked by 2 men in impeccably tailored suits who could only be lawyers. He was a man who commanded gravity, and his presence sucked all the air out of the room. His cold, dark eyes took in the scene. His weeping daughter, his furious older daughter, the pathetic sight of his son-in-law, and the scattered documents on the floor. He ignored Marcus completely, as if he were a piece of furniture. He walked to Isabella and placed a gentle hand on her arm. It's over, Mia Cara, he said, his voice a low rumble. We're done with this. My men have the jet waiting. You and Leo are coming home. We will handle the annulment. As for him, he finally flicked his gaze to Marcus, a look of pure disgust on his face. My legal team will ensure he never recovers from this. He will learn the price of betraying a Rossi. This was it. The crossroads. Isabella looked at her father, the avatar of her old life, offering a clean, surgical, and vengeful exit. She looked at Marcus, the architect of her current misery, a broken man on the verge of total annihilation. Then her gaze fell on Leo, sleeping in Sophia's arms, his face a perfect picture of peace. What did Leo deserve? A father, even a flawed one, or a life defined by his father's spectacular family-ordained destruction? A decision crystallized in her mind, cold and clear as a diamond. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about love. It was about power and control. Her father wanted to destroy Marcus, but letting him be destroyed meant the fallout, the lawsuits, the loss of the house could still splash onto her and Leo. Saving him, however, meant she owned him. She turned to her father. Thank you, Papa, but I'm not leaving. She then turned her steely gaze to Marcus. You want the money to save your deal? You'll get it, but not as my husband. She walked over to one of her father's lawyers. Draw it up, she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that surprised everyone, including herself. A post-nuptial agreement. A new business contract. I will provide the capital to save Project Chimera. In return, I want a 60% controlling stake in Thorn Dynamics, a personal, legally binding guarantee for Marcus collateralized against all his future earnings and veto power over all major company decisions. He will report to a board that I appoint. He will no longer be the CEO. He'll be the CTO. I will be the primary shareholder. He will work for me. His salary will be determined by me, and every cent he earns will first go to repay the loan he took out against our son's home." The room was silent. Lorenzo Rossi stared at his daughter, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. He had come to crush a boy, but his daughter had just shown him how to enslave a king. Isabella looked at Marcus, her eyes devoid of warmth or affection. "Those are my terms. You will save your company, but you will lose your freedom. For real this time. You will work to earn back the home you gambled away. You will work to earn the right to be this child's father. Take the deal or walk away and let my father's lawyers have what's left of you. You have 1 minute to decide." Marcus stood there trapped and utterly defeated. He looked at the ruins of his ambition, the fury of the family he had betrayed, and the cold, hard face of the woman who now held his entire future in her hands. He had posted, "free at last," as a joke. Now he was being offered the deal of a lifetime, a gilded cage. It was his only way out. "I accept." He whispered the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. 6 months later, the world had been remade. The sterile, emotionally charged atmosphere of the hospital room had been replaced by the chic, minimalist aesthetic of the new Thorne Dynamics headquarters. The company, powered by Isabella's emergency capital injection and Lorenzo Rossi's formidable business network, had not just survived, it had flourished. Project Chimera was the talk of the logistics industry, a disruptive force poised for massive success. But the victory felt different to everyone involved. The power dynamic in Isabella and Marcus's relationship had been irrevocably altered. It was no longer a marriage of equals, it was a corporate hierarchy. Isabella, with her 60% stake, was the silent, powerful chairwoman of the board. She had installed her sister Sophia and one of her father's most ruthless financial advisors as board members. She rarely came to the office, but her presence was felt in every decision, every budget approval, every strategic pivot. Marcus was, as per their agreement, the chief technology officer. He was brilliant at his job, freed from the pressures of fundraising and management. He poured all his energy into the technology, refining the code, leading the development team, and pushing the boundaries of what the software could do. He was professionally successful, but personally, he was a man living in a state of perpetual penance. Their home life was a carefully choreographed dance of civility and distance. They had not bought the colonial house. Instead, they lived in a sleek, modern apartment owned by the Rossi Family Trust. It was beautiful, sterile, and felt more like a corporate residence than a home. They were co-parents first and foremost. They were unfailingly polite to each other for Leo's sake. They discussed feeding schedules, nap times, and developmental milestones with the detached professionalism of two colleagues managing a joint project. The love, the laughter, the easy intimacy that had once defined them was gone, replaced by a fragile, unspoken truce. Marcus never made a purchase over $100 without texting her first. His salary, determined by the board she controlled, was automatically split, with the majority going into a trust for Leo and to repay the loan against their once future home. They were in therapy. Twice a week they sat in a plush office with a woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, who specialized in high-conflict couples. The sessions were brutal. Marcus had confessed everything, not just his actions, but the deep-seated fear of inadequacy that had driven him. He spoke of growing up with little of his desperate need to prove himself worthy of Isabella and her powerful family, a need so profound it had blinded him to everything else. Isabella, for her part, spoke of the profound violation of trust. It wasn't the post, she explained in one session, her voice clear and steady. The post was just the tip of the iceberg. It was the realization that the man I was building a life with had a completely separate ledger. He saw our shared assets as his personal safety net for risks I never agreed to take. He saw me as a resource, not a partner. There were no miraculous breakthroughs. There was only slow, grueling work. Marcus was learning humility. He was learning to listen to truly see the consequences of his actions beyond his own ambition. He was becoming an excellent father present and engaged in a way he never had been before. His moments with Leo were the only times Isabella saw a flicker of the old Marcus, the joyful, loving man she had married. Isabella was learning to live with the scars. She was discovering a strength and business acumen she never knew she possessed. She was a mother, a formidable chairwoman, a woman in complete control of her own destiny. But a part of her was in mourning for the simpler, more naive love she had lost. She was safe, she was powerful, but she wasn't happy. Not yet. One evening, Marcus was putting Leo to bed, singing him a soft, off-key lullaby. Isabella stood in the doorway watching them. The scene was perfectly domestic, yet it felt like watching a movie of someone else's life. After he had tucked Leo into his crib, Marcus came out, closing the door softly behind him. He saw Isabella standing there and gave her a small, hesitant smile. "He went right down," he said quietly. "You're good with him," she admitted. It was the closest she had come to a compliment in months. He nodded, accepting the small offering. The final installment to pay back the private loan on the house goes through tomorrow. It's done. The lien will be gone." "I know," she said. "I saw the payment schedule." He took a hesitant step closer. "I know it doesn't fix anything. Not really. But I needed you to know. I've done the work, and I'm going to keep doing it. Not just because of the contract, but because I have to." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a sad, weary honesty. "I broke us, Isabella. I know that. I don't know if we can ever be fixed. But I hope that one day you won't look at me and see a liability." Isabella held his gaze. The anger had faded long ago, leaving behind a vast empty space. For the first time she allowed herself to feel something other than caution or control. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. It was a flicker of possibility. A recognition of the broken man in front of her who was trying day by day to piece himself back together. "One day at a time, Marcus," she said, her voice soft. "One day at a time." It wasn't a promise and it wasn't an absolution, but it was a beginning. Their old life was gone forever, destroyed by a single careless post and the deeper betrayals it revealed. This new life was a fragile, uncertain thing being built not on a foundation of passionate love, but on the hard-won bedrock of consequences, accountability, and the shared unconditional love for the son who bound them together. The balance of power had shifted, but in doing so it had created a new, more honest, and far more challenging path forward. And so the story of Isabella and Marcus isn't a fairy tale with a happy ending. It's a real-life lesson in consequences. A 3-word post born from arrogance and insecurity became the catalyst that unraveled a marriage and exposed a far deeper betrayal. But from that wreckage, something new and arguably stronger was forged. It's a story about trust, how easily it can be shattered, and the near impossible price of rebuilding it. Isabella's actions might seem extreme to some, but what would you have done? When the person you trust most gambles with your shared future behind your back, is there any response that's truly off limits? We all face moments where trust is tested. Marcus's mistake was monumental, but his journey toward accountability is just as important. Can a person truly change, and can a relationship survive such a fundamental breach? What do you think? Was Isabella justified in her hostile takeover of their life? Or was it a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. The champagne was flowing. The laughter was deafening, but it all came to a sickening halt with a single tap on a microphone. Liam Sterling, a man whose net worth was eclipsed only by his ego, stood before 100 of their closest friends and business partners. He raised a glass not to his beautiful 5 months pregnant wife Clara, but to her public execution. With a smile that never reached his eyes, he announced their divorce. By sunrise, the glittering life Clara knew was gone, and she was a refugee, her only sanctuary, the one place she never expected, the doorstep of the woman whose son had just destroyed her. The air in the Sterling mansion hummed with the electric current of manufactured joy. It was a symphony of clinking crystal, a murmur of expensive pleasantries, and the ghost of $1,000-an-hour jazz trio weaving through the opulent rooms. The house itself was a monument to modern wealth, a stark statement of glass and steel perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. From the infinity pool that bled into the horizon to the curated art that hung on the walls, a Rothko here, a de Kooning there, everything was designed to impress, to intimidate, to declare that Liam Sterling was not just a man, but an empire. Clara Sterling, swathed in a bespoke Valentino gown of deep sapphire silk that draped elegantly over the gentle swell of her pregnancy, moved through the throng like a phantom hostess. She was the other masterpiece in Liam's collection. Her smile was practiced, her laughter a delicate chime, her hand a cool, steady presence on the arm of a senator or the back of a tech CEO. She was beautiful, poised, and perfectly curated to be the wife of a man like Liam. Tonight was the annual Sterling Foundation Gala, a night where Liam played the benevolent philanthropist, writing checks with a flourish that made the city's elite applaud his generosity. For Clara, it was just another performance. For 5 years she had played this role. She had learned to navigate the treacherous waters of high society, to differentiate between a genuine smile and a baring of teeth. She had learned to ignore the subtle condescension in the eyes of women who saw her as little more than a trophy, a beautiful woman from a good but not wealthy family who had won the ultimate prize. Their love story, as Liam liked to tell it, was a fairy tale. The brilliant, self-made billionaire sweeping the charming art history graduate off her feet. He had showered her with a life she couldn't have imagined: private jets to Paris for brunch, front row seats at Milan Fashion Week, a black Amex card with no conceivable limit. In return, she gave him her grace, her quiet intelligence, and a veneer of class that his new money desperately craved. And soon she would give him an heir. But the gilded cage, no matter how spacious, was still a cage. The fairy tale had long since revealed its darker chapters. Liam's affection was conditional, his praise a tool for manipulation. He was a man of immense charm and chilling coldness, often in the same breath. He praised her impeccable taste when she decorated their home, but would fly into a quiet, terrifying rage if she moved a single object without his permission. He called her his queen in public, but in private he chipped away at her confidence with a sculptor's precision, isolating her from her old friends and making her entirely dependent on his world. Darling Liam's voice, smooth as single malt scotch, cut through her thoughts. He appeared at her side, his hand landing on the small of her back. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was an act of possession. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a Tom Ford suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his eyes the color of a stormy sea. "You look breathtaking," the perfect Madonna. The compliment, with its thinly veiled reference to her pregnancy, sent a familiar chill down her spine. To Liam, this baby wasn't a product of love. It was the ultimate acquisition. The Sterling heir. The continuation of his legacy. "Thank you, Liam," she murmured, forcing a smile. "It's a wonderful party. The foundation will be very pleased." "The foundation is me," he said, his smile tightening. "Don't forget that." He leaned in his voice, a low whisper against her ear. "Did you speak to Mr. Dubois about the museum wing?" "Yes," she said, her own voice barely audible. He was non-committal. He said the board was still considering other patrons. Liam's fingers tightened on her back, a painful pinch hidden by the fabric of her gown. "Non-committal is not the answer I wanted. I've pledged $10 million. See to it that he becomes committed. You're good at that. Charming people." Before she could respond, he had turned away, his public persona slipping back into place as he greeted a new arrival with a booming laugh. Clara took a steadying breath, her hand instinctively going to her belly. She felt a faint flutter, a tiny reassuring kick. "It's you and me, little one," she thought, a wave of fierce, protective love washing over her. "It will all be worth it for you." She surveyed the room. The faces were a blur of familiar power players. the Athertons whose family had practically built the city, the formidable Jessica Vance, a hedge fund manager who could make or break companies with a single phone call. They were all here orbiting her husband, the brilliant son, at the center of this glittering, ruthless universe. They were all witnesses, though they didn't know it yet, to the final brutal act of her marriage. She caught sight of her reflection in the vast floor-to-ceiling window. A woman in a sapphire dress, a silhouette against the endless dark ocean. She looked serene, untouchable, a perfect illusion. But inside, a quiet scream was building, a desperate yearning for something real, something more than this beautiful hollow life. She was lonely in a room full of people, a prisoner in her own home. She just didn't know that the walls of her prison were about to be spectacularly, cruelly demolished. The evening wore on, a relentless performance of social graces. Clara had managed to corner Jean-Pierre Dubois, the wizened director of the city's art museum. She'd deployed the full force of her charm, speaking passionately about the importance of public art, her knowledge of the Impressionists, her master's thesis topic, lending her an air of authority that temporarily eclipsed her status as just Liam Sterling's wife. She thought she had made headway. She thought she had done her duty. As the jazz trio took a break, a hush fell over the crowd. Liam had moved to the small raised platform near the grand piano, a champagne flute in one hand, a microphone in the other. A warm, expectant spotlight found him. This was a familiar part of the script. Liam's speech was the highlight of the gala the moment he would announce the staggering sum raised and pledge even more of his own fortune, cementing his godlike status in the city's philanthropic circles. Clara stood near the edge of the crowd, a polite smile fixed on her face. She felt a sense of relief. The night was almost over. Soon the guests would depart, the mask would come off, and she could retreat into the quiet solitude of her wing of the mansion. "Thank you all for coming," Liam began, his voice resonating with practiced warmth. "Your generosity tonight has been, as always, overwhelming. Together we've raised an astonishing $12 million for children's literacy programs across the state." A wave of enthusiastic applause rippled through the room. Liam let it wash over him, a small satisfied smile playing on his lips. He looked out at the sea of adoring faces, his gaze sweeping over them before finally deliberately landing on Clara. His eyes were different. The practiced warmth was gone, replaced by an arctic chill that made the blood freeze in her veins. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Generosity is a funny thing. He continued, his tone shifting, becoming more intimate, more confessional. The crowd leaned in, sensing a change in the emotional weather. "We give our money, our time, our hearts. We invest in things we believe will bring us returns. A better community, a brighter future, a lasting legacy." He took a slow sip of his champagne, his eyes still locked on hers. She felt 100 pairs of eyes follow his gaze, turning to her. She was pinned by the weight of their collective stare. Her smile began to feel like a cracking facade. "I have always been a man who believes in cutting my losses," Liam said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "When an investment fails to yield its expected returns, when it becomes a liability, a smart businessman divests. He moves on to more profitable ventures. He doesn't throw good money after bad." A confused murmur rippled through the guests. This was not the usual self-congratulatory speech. This was something else entirely. Clara's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She could feel the color draining from her face. "Tonight, as I stand here on the cusp of a new chapter for my foundation, I have decided to apply that same principle to my personal life." He paused, letting the silence stretch, wringing every drop of drama from the moment. Then he raised his glass. But he wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. He was looking directly at Clara, a cruel, triumphant smirk twisting his handsome features. "So I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, his voice ringing with a terrifying clarity that cut through the silence. "To a new beginning, and to the end of my marriage." Clara and I will be divorcing." The words hit the room like a physical blow. There was a collective gasp, a shocked, disbelieving intake of breath. The air crackled with scandal. Jean-Pierre Dubois' jaw was slack. Jessica Vance's perfectly arched eyebrows shot up to her hairline. Every single guest was staring their faces a mixture of horror, pity, and a raw, undisguised hunger for the drama unfolding before them. For Clara, the world dissolved into a meaningless roar. The clinking of glasses, the whispers, the faces, it all blurred into an impressionistic nightmare. The only thing in focus was Liam's face, his expression of cold, calculated victory. He had done this deliberately. Not in the sterile quiet of a lawyer's office, but here, in front of everyone. He hadn't just ended their marriage, he had stripped her of her dignity piece by painful piece in the most public way imaginable. He was making an example of her. He was branding her as a failed investment. Her hand flew to her belly, a desperate, instinctual gesture to protect the only thing that mattered. She could feel her baby, a tiny, innocent life, caught in the crossfire of this monstrous act. The room began to spin. The sapphire dress felt like a lead weight dragging her down. The air was thick, unbreathable. She saw a flicker of movement. Chloe, her one true friend in this sea of acquaintances, was pushing through the crowd towards her, her face a mask of fury. But Clara couldn't wait. She couldn't stand there for one more second and endure the pitying stares, the salacious whispers. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she turned. She didn't run. She walked. Head held high back, ramrod straight, she moved through the stunned, parting crowd. Each step was an agony, each beat of her heart, a hammer blow of humiliation. She walked past the Rothko, past the grand piano, past the jazz trio who stood frozen with their instruments. She walked out of the grand hall, away from the wreckage of her life, the sound of her husband's voice now trying to calm the chaos he had unleashed, fading behind her like a bad dream. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to get away. The silence of the long white corridor was a deafening roar compared to the chaos she had left behind. Clara's stilettos clicked against the polished marble, the sound echoing the frantic, unsteady rhythm of her heart. She didn't look back. She couldn't. To look back would be to see the faces, the whispers, the ruin. She reached their private wing of the mansion, the space that was supposed to be a sanctuary. The door slid open with a soft, expensive hiss. Inside, everything was pristine, sterile, and cold. A massive California king bed, a walk-in closet the size of a small apartment filled with clothes she would never wear again, and a panoramic window showcasing a city that suddenly felt alien and hostile. For a moment she stood frozen in the center of the room, her body trembling uncontrollably. A single dry sob escaped her lips, a harsh, ugly sound in the crushing silence. Humiliation washed over her in hot, sickening waves. He had done it on purpose. He had planned it. The speech, the timing, the audience. It was all a calculated act of psychological warfare. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had immolated her entire existence. Her gaze fell upon a silver-framed photograph on her bedside table. It was from their honeymoon in Santorini, a carefully staged shot of them laughing, the Aegean Sea a brilliant blue behind them. Liam's arm was wrapped around her, his smile blinding. It was all a lie. A beautiful, meticulously crafted lie. With a sudden, violent surge of rage, she swept the photograph off the table. It crashed against the far wall, the glass shattering into 1,000 tiny pieces, just like her life. The rage gave way to a chilling clarity. She couldn't stay here. This wasn't her home anymore. It was a mausoleum of a dead marriage. Every object, every surface was tainted with his presence, with the memory of his cruelty. She had to leave, now. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for what to take. What do you take when you're leaving a life of infinite possessions? The jewelry, the designer bags, the art. It was all meaningless. It was all his. It was all part of the gilded cage. She went to the closet and ignored the rows of Chanel and Dior. At the very back, behind a rack of evening gowns, was a small, worn leather suitcase. It was the one she had brought with her when she first moved in 5 years ago. Inside were a few old sweaters, a pair of comfortable jeans, a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, and a faded photograph of her parents. It was a relic from a life before Liam, a life that was her own. Her hands shook as she pulled it out. She stripped off the Valentino gown, letting it pool on the floor like a puddle of spilled ink. She changed into the jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, the familiar comfort of the fabric a small solace. She packed essentials, her mind working on a frantic, desperate autopilot. A toothbrush, her prenatal vitamins, the small amount of cash in her wallet, her phone, and her passport. She took one last look at the glittering prison around her. Then she walked out without a second glance. She bypassed the main elevators, taking a service stairwell at the back of the wing, her footsteps echoing in the cold concrete shaft. Her only thought was to escape the property before Liam or his security team could stop her. His control was absolute. He would likely cancel her credit cards, her car access, everything. She emerged into the cool night air near the staff parking lot. The party was still in full swing, the sound of it a distant, grotesque hum. She pulled her phone out, her fingers fumbling with the screen. She had no one to call. Her parents were on a cruise in the Mediterranean, a trip Liam had gifted them. Her old friends. She had let those connections wither under the suffocating shadow of her marriage. There was Chloe. But Chloe was still inside, likely trying to find her. Calling her would only draw attention. Then a name surfaced in her mind. A long shot. A desperate last-ditch idea born of sheer panic. Catherine Sterling, Liam's mother. They had a strained formal relationship. Catherine was old money, a woman of quiet, formidable dignity who lived in a sprawling, slightly faded estate in the Hudson Valley, a world away from Liam's sleek, modern empire. She had always been polite to Clara, but there was a distance, a reservation in her eyes. Catherine had never seemed to fully approve of her son's ostentatious lifestyle, or perhaps of the woman who had become a part of it. But Clara also remembered a moment, a brief conversation a year ago at Christmas. Liam had made a casually cruel remark about Clara's family, and she had seen a flicker of something in Catherine's eyes, a sharp, unmistakable disapproval directed at her own son. It was a fleeting moment, but it had stuck with her. It was a crazy, desperate gamble. What would she say? "Hello, Catherine, your son just publicly humiliated me, and I'm pregnant and homeless. Can I come stay?" But where else could she go? She had a few $1,000s in cash. It wouldn't last long. She needed a safe harbor, a place to think, to breathe, to figure out what to do next. With a trembling finger, she opened the ride-sharing app on her phone. She typed in the address for the nearest private airfield. She knew Liam kept a small jet there for short-haul trips. It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, his pilots would be loyal to a paycheck, not to him. No, that was a foolish idea. He would have them on his payroll. She changed the destination to the main airport, JFK. It was a start. She would fly to New York, and from there she would figure it out. She booked a ticket on the first red-eye flight, a commercial flight, something she hadn't done in 5 years. The car arrived minutes later, a nondescript sedan. As she slipped into the back seat, she glanced back at the mansion one last time. It was a glittering beacon of power and wealth on the cliffside, her prison. And as the car pulled away, melting into the darkness of the Pacific Coast Highway, Clara didn't feel sadness. She felt a terrifying, exhilarating rush of freedom. The flight was just beginning. The 6-hour flight to New York was a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. Clara sat huddled in a window seat in economy class, a baseball cap pulled low over her face, the unfamiliar proximity of strangers, a strange comfort after the cavernous isolation of her former life. She didn't sleep. Her mind replayed Liam's words, his smug, cruel face, over and over again. Each replay was a fresh stab of pain, but with each stab a layer of shock peeled away, revealing a hard, cold core of anger. She landed at JFK as the sun was casting a pale, watery light over the city. The raw, chaotic energy of New York was a jolt to her senses. For a moment, she felt completely, terrifyingly alone. A pregnant woman with a small suitcase, a few $1,000s, and the ruins of a life in her wake. The impulse to find an anonymous hotel and hide was overwhelming, but the image of Catherine Sterling's face, that flicker of disapproval towards her son, returned to her. It was the only sliver of hope she had. Taking a deep breath, she rented a car using her debit card, praying Liam hadn't thought to cancel it yet, and began the 2-hour drive north into the heart of the Hudson Valley. As she left the city behind, the landscape softened into rolling hills and lush greenery. The houses grew farther apart, replaced by grand old estates hidden behind stone walls and ancient trees. It was a different kind of wealth from the sharp-edged, ostentatious world she had left behind in California. This was old, quiet, and deeply entrenched. She found the address easily. A pair of imposing but slightly rusted wrought iron gates stood open at the end of a long gravel driveway. The sign read, Blackwood Manor. It was Catherine's family home, a name that carried a weight Liam's Sterling never could. The house came into view, and it took her breath away. It wasn't a sleek glass box. It was a magnificent rambling stone manor, covered in ivy and steeped in history. It was beautiful, but in a way that felt real, lived in, and slightly melancholic. It looked like a house that had seen generations of life, of joy and of sorrow. Her courage faltered. She sat in the rental car at the end of the driveway for a full 10 minutes, her hands gripping the steering wheel. What was she doing? Catherine could slam the door in her face. She could call Liam. She could tell her she had made her bed and now she had to lie in it. No, she told herself, her hand dropping to her belly. You're not just doing this for you. The thought of her child gave her the final push she needed. She put the car in drive and crunched slowly up the gravel path. She parked the car and walked to the massive oak front door. Before she could even knock, it swung open. Catherine Sterling stood in the doorway. She was a tall, slender woman in her late 60s, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She was wearing simple linen trousers and a cashmere sweater, a stark contrast to the designer labels she wore at Liam's events. Her face, etched with fine lines, was calm, her blue eyes sharp and intelligent. There was no shock on her face, no surprise, only a deep, weary sadness. I was wondering when you would arrive, Catherine said, her voice calm and steady. I saw the news alerts. The gossip sites are having a field day. It's utterly barbaric. Clara stared at her, speechless. She had expected shouting accusations, at the very least a barrage of questions. Not this quiet, solemn acceptance. Come in, child, Catherine said, gently stepping aside. You look exhausted. Clara stepped over the threshold and the door closed behind her, shutting out the world. The inside of the house was just as she had imagined. It was filled with antique furniture, worn oriental rugs, shelves overflowing with books, and the scent of old wood and beeswax. A fire crackled in a large stone hearth, and 2 golden retrievers lifted their heads from the rug, thumping their tails in a lazy welcome. The dam of composure Clara had so carefully constructed for the past 12 hours finally broke. A choked sob escaped her, and her legs felt weak. Catherine was there in an instant. Her arms, surprisingly strong, wrapped around Clara, holding her steady. It's all right, she murmured. Her voice losing its formal edge, becoming something softer, something maternal. You're safe here. He can't touch you here. She led the weeping Clara to a comfortable armchair by the fire and disappeared for a moment, returning with a cup of steaming chamomile tea. Drink this, she commanded gently. There will be time for talk later. First, you need to rest. Clara drank the tea, the warmth seeping into her cold, trembling hands. She looked at her mother-in-law, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time. She saw not the distant, formal matriarch, but a woman whose eyes held a profound, deep-seated disappointment, not in Clara, but in her own child. Why, Clara whispered the question, raw and ragged. Why are you being so kind to me? Catherine sat down in the chair opposite her, her gaze unwavering. Because you are carrying my grandchild, she said, her voice firm. And because no woman deserves what my son did to you. What he did was not just cruel. It was vulgar. It was the act of a man I no longer recognize. She leaned forward, her expression hardening. I have been estranged from Liam in spirit, if not in fact, for many years. I watched him become a caricature of wealth, a man obsessed with power and image. I tried to warn him. I tried to guide him. But he is his father's son in all the ways that matter least. A log in the fireplace shifted and popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Liam may have his father's business acumen, Catherine continued, her voice laced with a bitterness that stunned Clara, but he also has his cruelty. And his secrets. I imagine you have many questions, and I promise you, Clara, I will help you find the answers. But more than that, I will help you fight. He has underestimated you, and he has most certainly underestimated me. In that moment, sitting in the warm, firelit living room of a woman she barely knew, Clara felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years' hope. She was not alone. She had found not just a sanctuary, but an ally. An unlikely, formidable, and powerful ally. The war was far from over, but for the first time she felt like she might just have a chance of winning. The first few days at Blackwood Manor were a cocoon of quiet recuperation. Catherine was a constant, unobtrusive presence. She made sure Clara ate, that she slept in a comfortable guest room with a view of the sprawling gardens, and that she was left alone with her thoughts when she needed to be. They spoke little of Liam. Instead, Catherine shared stories of the house of her family, of a world that valued legacy over currency and character over charisma. Clara felt herself slowly unfurling, the tight knot of terror and humiliation in her chest beginning to loosen. She took long walks through the gardens, the crisp autumn air a balm to her frayed nerves. She read books from Catherine's vast library, losing herself in worlds far from her own. For the first time in years, she felt the space to simply be. One crisp afternoon, about a week after her arrival, Catherine found her sitting on a stone bench overlooking the Hudson River. "You have your color back," Catherine observed, sitting beside her. "That's good to see." "I feel more human," Clara admitted. "Thank you, Catherine, for everything." "It's the least I can do," Catherine said, her gaze fixed on the river. "But peace and quiet will only get us so far. Liam will have made his move by now." As if on cue, Clara's phone, which had been blessedly silent, buzzed. It was an email from a law firm she didn't recognize, Harrison and Shaw. The subject line was chillingly simple, Sterling v. Sterling. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was a formal notice. Liam had officially filed for divorce. Attached was a document outlining the terms of his proposed settlement. Her blood ran cold as she read it. He was offering her a one-time payment of $1 million. In exchange, she was to sign a comprehensive NDA, relinquish all claims to any of their shared assets, and this was the part that made her feel physically ill, agree to grant him sole legal and physical custody of their unborn child upon its birth. He cited her emotional instability, evidenced by her abrupt and dramatic departure from their home, as grounds for her being an unfit mother. The monster, Clara whispered, the phone slipping from her numb fingers. "He wants to take my baby." Catherine picked up the phone and read the email, her expression hardening into one of cold fury. "Harrison and Shaw," she said, her voice tight with contempt. "Of course. Richard Harrison is the most ruthless corporate lawyer in New York. He has no morals, only billable hours. This is not a divorce proceeding, Clara. This is a hostile takeover." She stood up, her posture radiating a sudden intense energy. "I knew he would do something like this. He's trying to scare you. He's trying to break you before the fight even begins." "What do I do?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. $1 million sounds like a lot, but compared to his wealth. And my baby. I can't. "You will do nothing," Catherine stated firmly. "You will not respond. You will not panic. You will let me handle this. We are not going to play defense. We are going to attack." She led Clara back to the house, to a grand wood-paneled study that smelled of leather and old paper. From a locked drawer in a massive mahogany desk, She retrieved a thick, leather-bound ledger. "Liam thinks his empire is impenetrable," Catherine said, opening the ledger on the desk. "He thinks because he built it, he understands all its weaknesses. He is wrong." She turned the ledger towards Clara. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting and columns of figures. "Liam's father, my late husband, was a brilliant but reckless man. When he died, he left a financial mess that was far more precarious than anyone knew. I spent 2 years with accountants and lawyers quietly cleaning it up. In the process, I learned to read the bones of a business. And I have been keeping my own private accounts of Liam's businesses ever since he took over." Clara looked at her, stunned. "You've been tracking his finances?" "A mother worries," Catherine said with a grim smile. "Especially when her son worships at the altar of risk." "Liam's company. Sterling Industries is a house of cards, Clara. It looks magnificent from the outside, but its foundations are built on a mountain of debt and dangerously over-leveraged assets. He's been using short-term loans to finance long-term projects, juggling payments, robbing Peter to pay Paul. The market has been good to him, so he's stayed afloat. But a downturn, a single major project failure, and the whole thing could collapse." She pointed to a specific entry in the ledger. "Look here. The Azure Sky development in Dubai. He's sunk nearly $500 million of borrowed money into it. The project has been plagued by delays and whispers of corruption with local officials. It's his biggest gamble, and from what my sources tell me, it is on the verge of catastrophic failure." The pieces started to click into place in Clara's mind. Liam's increasing paranoia, his obsession with the museum wing donation, a desperate attempt to maintain his image of success, and the public brutal divorce. "The prenup," Clara said suddenly. "We have a prenuptial agreement. I barely read it at the time. I was in love, I didn't care." "Let me guess," Catherine said. "It entitles you to a significant settlement, something like $50 million in the event of a divorce, unless you are the one to be unfaithful, or are deemed to be at fault." Clara nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, but I haven't done anything." "Exactly," Catherine replied. "He couldn't find a reason to invoke the clause, so he created one. By humiliating you so publicly, he hoped you would react hysterically, irrationally, fleeing in the middle of the night, disappearing. He's painting you as unstable, the at-fault party. He's trying to get out of the divorce for pennies on the dollar because he doesn't have the $50 million to give you. He is financially hemorrhaging." The audacity of the scheme was breathtaking. It wasn't just about cruelty, it was about cold, hard cash. He was willing to destroy her to take their child to save himself from financial ruin. "But what about the baby?" Clara asked, her voice thick with horror. "The baby is his trump card," Catherine said, her voice grim. "His ace in the hole. If he has the sterling heir, his investors, his bankers, they will see continuity. They will see a future. The legacy is secured even if the balance sheets are bleeding red. He thinks he can bully you into giving up your child and in doing so save his empire." Catherine closed the ledger with a decisive thud. "But we have something he doesn't know we have. We have the truth. And we have this." She tapped the leather-bound book. "This is our weapon. Richard Harrison can send all the threatening letters he wants. But he is about to come up against a lawyer of a very different caliber." She picked up the phone on her desk and dialed a number from memory. "Arthur, it's Catherine Blackwood," she said, her voice all business. "I have a situation here, a family matter. Yes, it involves my son. I need you to come to the manor. And Arthur, bring your sharpest teeth." She hung up the phone and looked at Clara, her eyes gleaming with a warrior's light. "Arthur Prescott is my family's lawyer. His family has represented my family for a century. He is semi-retired, but he despises corporate sharks like Harrison, and he loves a good fight. The game has changed, Clara. Liam wanted a war. Now he's going to get one." Arthur Prescott arrived the next morning. He was a man in his 70s with a shock of white hair, a tweed jacket, and eyes that twinkled with a shrewd intelligence that belied his grandfatherly appearance. He greeted Catherine with a warm hug, and Clara with a kind, reassuring smile. He listened intently for over 2 hours in the study as Catherine laid out the situation, presenting her ledger as evidence, while Clara recounted the story of the party and the threatening email from Liam's lawyer. When they were finished, Arthur sat back, steepling his fingers. "Despicable," he murmured, "and utterly desperate. This isn't a strategy, it's a Hail Mary pass. Liam is betting everything on your fear, Clara." He turned to her. "Our first step is to go on the offensive. We will file a countersuit. We will not only reject his insulting offer, but we will sue for the full amount stipulated in the prenuptial agreement. Furthermore, we will petition for sole custody for you, citing his act of extreme public cruelty as evidence of a character unfit to be a primary caregiver. We will paint him not as a powerful businessman, but as a reckless, emotionally abusive man who would publicly humiliate his pregnant wife to solve a cash flow problem." For the first time, Clara felt a surge of power. "Can we win?" "Winning is a matter of leverage," Arthur said, a glint in his eye. And thanks to Catherine's meticulous record-keeping, he nodded towards the ledger. "We have a great deal of it. Richard Harrison thinks this is a simple, brutal divorce. He has no idea we're about to put Sterling Industries under a microscope." The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal activity. Arthur's team filed the countersuit, and the response from Liam's camp was swift and furious. The letters from Harrison and Shaw became more frequent, more threatening. They accused Clara of being a gold digger, of having an affair, a baseless, easily disproven lie, of plotting to extort money from Liam. They demanded psychiatric evaluations. They tried to subpoena her long-distance phone records with her parents. Each letter was a fresh assault, but with Catherine and Arthur at her side, Clara found a new strength. She was no longer a frightened victim. She was a key player in a high-stakes battle for her future and her child's. She spent hours with Arthur, going over her life with Liam, detailing every instance of his control, his emotional manipulation, his casual cruelty. It was painful, but also empowering. She was finally giving voice to the silent screams she had suppressed for years. Meanwhile, Liam was not idle. The story of the divorce gala had become a fixture in the gossip columns. Liam, a master of public relations, began to spin a new narrative. He gave a carefully curated interview to a major financial newspaper, painting himself as a heartbroken husband, betrayed by a volatile, materialistic wife. He spoke of his profound desire to protect his unborn child from a damaging environment. His vast PR machine worked overtime to scrub the reality of what he'd done and replace it with a more palatable fiction. He also began to apply financial pressure. As predicted, Clara's debit card was declined. Her private accounts, which Liam had always funded, were frozen. The one-time payment of $1 million was dangled in front of her again and again by his lawyers, a tempting lifeline designed to make her give up. But Catherine was her fortress. "Let him," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand when Clara told her about the frozen accounts. "He is severing every tie that connects you to him. He is making you independent, and he's too foolish to see it. You are a resident of my home. You are my guest. You will want for nothing." One evening, a sleek black car came up the driveway. A man in a sharp suit delivered a large, beautifully wrapped box. It was from a high-end baby boutique in Manhattan. There was no note. Clara opened it to find an absurdly expensive layette cashmere onesies, tiny silver monogrammed booties, a blanket that probably cost more than her first car. It was a classic Liam move, a power play disguised as a gift, a reminder that he could provide for this child in a way she, now penniless, could not. It was meant to intimidate her, to make her feel inadequate. She looked at the box with disgust. The old Clara would have been confused, maybe even touched by the gesture. The new Clara saw it for what it was, a threat. She walked the box out to the large trash receptacles at the side of the manor and dropped it inside with a satisfying thud. The battle for public opinion raged, but the real war was happening behind the scenes. Arthur's legal team filed a motion for discovery, demanding full access to the financial records of Sterling Industries, specifically citing concerns about the company's solvency and its ability to meet its obligations, including Liam's potential divorce settlement. This was the move that changed the game. It was a direct strike at the heart of Liam's empire. Harrison and Shaw fought it furiously, claiming it was an irrelevant fishing expedition. But a judge intrigued by the preliminary evidence Arthur presented granted the motion. The storm was gathering. Liam had started a fire thinking he could control the burn. Now the wind had changed direction and the flames were racing back towards his own house of cards. And in the quiet sanctuary of Blackwood Manor, Clara, her belly growing with the new life inside her, prepared for the final confrontation. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the legacy of truth and dignity that Catherine had shown her, and for the future of the child who deserved to be born into a world free of its father's toxic influence. The court-ordered discovery was a nuclear bomb dropped on Liam Sterling's empire. As Arthur's forensic accountants began to comb through the tangled web of Sterling Industries, the picture Catherine had painted became terrifyingly clear. It was worse than she had even suspected. The Dubai project was a black hole of debt, and Liam had been illegally moving funds from other corporate entities, and even from the Sterling Foundation's accounts, to keep it from collapsing before he could secure a new round of financing. The news sent shockwaves through the financial community. The carefully constructed image of Liam Sterling, the infallible Midas-touch billionaire, began to crack. His lenders grew nervous. His board of directors, once little more than a rubber stamp for his ambitions, started asking pointed questions. The PR machine could no longer contain the story. The narrative shifted from a messy celebrity divorce to a potential corporate implosion. Liam was cornered, and like a cornered animal, he became even more dangerous. He demanded a face-to-face meeting. Not with the lawyers, but with Clara. Alone. His lawyers framed it as a final good-faith attempt to resolve things amicably for the sake of the child. Arthur was vehemently opposed. "It's a trap, Clara. He's going to try to manipulate you, threaten you, anything to get you to call off the dogs." Catherine, however, had a different perspective. "She should go," she said, her eyes meeting Clara's. "But she will not go alone, and she will not go unprepared." Catherine looked at Clara, who was now nearly 7 months pregnant, her strength and resolve a palpable aura around her. "He still sees the woman you were, the quiet, accommodating girl he thought he could break. He has no idea who you've become. Let him see you. Let him see that his power over you is gone. Sometimes the only way to slay a dragon is to walk into its lair." The meeting was set for a neutral location, a private suite at the Carlyle Hotel in Manhattan. Arthur insisted on one condition: he would wait in the adjoining suite, and the entire meeting would be recorded. Liam's lawyers, desperate for any chance to stop the financial bleeding, reluctantly agreed. When Clara walked into the suite, Liam was already there, pacing in front of the window overlooking Central Park. He looked haggard. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, wired energy. There were dark circles under his eyes. He turned as she entered, and for a moment his mask slipped. He saw her, truly saw her. The swell of her belly prominent under a simple but elegant dress. Her face calm and composed. Her eyes clear and steady. There was no fear there. He had expected tears pleading. He was met with a serene strength that clearly unnerved him. "Clara," he said, his voice attempting its old familiar charm. "You look, well, I am," she replied, her voice even. She sat in an armchair, not waiting for him to invite her to do so. "Why did you want to see me, Liam?" He abandoned the pretense of pleasantries. "You have to stop this," he said, his voice a low, urgent hiss. "You and my mother and that fossil of a lawyer, you're destroying my company. You're destroying me." "You did this, Liam," she said, her voice remaining calm, cutting through his panic. "You did this when you decided to announce our divorce like it was a corporate restructuring. You did this when you tried to take my child away from me to cover your financial mistakes." "I did it to protect the legacy," he shot back, his voice rising. "Our child's legacy. Everything I have built is for him. You don't understand the pressure, the stakes." "I understand perfectly," Clara said, leaning forward slightly. "I understand that you were about to lose everything, so you tried to get rid of me for a fraction of what our prenup dictated. I understand that you value your image more than your wife and your bottom line more than your son. That's not legacy, Liam. That's a pathology." He stared at her flabbergasted. This was not the Clara he knew. The Clara he knew would have crumbled under his anger. He tried a different tack, his voice softening, becoming cloying. "Bella, please. Think of the baby. He doesn't deserve to be born into this chaos, this public spectacle. Call it off. We can go back. Not to how it was, but to something new. We can co-parent. I'll give you a generous settlement. Anything. Just make it stop." Clara listened, and she felt nothing but a profound, hollow pity for the man in front of her. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about money. "There is only one way this stops, Liam," she said, standing up. It was her turn to be in the position of power. "You will give me the full $50 million as stipulated in the agreement. It will be placed in a trust managed by Arthur and myself for our son. You will agree to my having sole physical custody. You will be allowed supervised visitation conditional upon your continued good behavior and a court-mandated course of anger management therapy." She paused, letting the weight of her terms sink in. "You will also issue a public apology, not to the media but to me, a real one. And finally, you will turn over all of Catherine's ledgers and our findings to the SEC. You will face the consequences of your own actions." He looked at her as if she had sprouted a second head. "You're insane," he breathed. "That would be suicide. They'll launch a full investigation. I could go to prison." That Clara said, her voice as cold and hard as diamond, is not my problem. You built this house of cards, Liam. You can either let it fall on its own, or you can have a hand in how it's dismantled. Those are my terms. You have 24 hours to have your lawyer call mine." She turned and walked towards the door, her step steady and sure. "Clara, wait," he called out, his voice cracking with desperation. "Don't do this. I'm still your husband. I'm the father of your child." She stopped at the door and looked back at him, at the broken, desperate man standing in the wreckage of his own making. "No, Liam," she said quietly. "You were the man I married. You are the biological father of my son. But his father, that is a title you will have to earn. And you have a very, very long way to go." She walked out the door, leaving him alone in the silent, opulent suite, the full weight of his reckoning finally crashing down upon him. The storm had broken. Faced with utter ruin, Liam folded. 23 hours later, a humbled Richard Harrison called Arthur Prescott and agreed to all of Clara's terms. The public apology arrived by courier, a handwritten letter that was stilted and self-serving but met the technical requirement. The funds were transferred into the trust. The custody agreement was signed, and Arthur, true to their word, anonymously forwarded the damning evidence of Liam's financial crimes to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The downfall of Liam Sterling was swift and spectacular. The SEC investigation led to federal charges. The Dubai project collapsed, taking his company down with it. He was forced to sell the cliffside mansion, the private jet, the art collection, all of it consumed by debts and legal fees. The man who had stood on a stage and wielded his power like a weapon was reduced to a tabloid caricature, a modern-day Icarus who had flown too close to the sun. In the end, he was sentenced to 5 years in a minimum security federal prison. 2 months after the meeting at the Carlisle, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Nicholas after her own father, but gave him the middle name Blackwood in honor of the woman who had become her anchor and her champion. She did not return to California. Blackwood Manor had become her home. The quiet rhythm of life there, punctuated by the gurgles and cries of her newborn son, was a healing balm. The vast, lonely mansion had been filled with a new kind of life. Her relationship with Catherine had blossomed into a deep and genuine bond. They were no longer just allies, they were family. Catherine, who had been a distant grandmother-in-waiting, was a doting, hands-on grandmother. She would spend hours rocking Nicholas by the fire, telling him stories of the family he was born into. Not the Sterling legacy of smoke and mirrors, but the Blackwood legacy of resilience, integrity, and quiet strength. Clara, for her part, found a new purpose. She was no longer defined by her husband or his wealth. She was a mother. She was the manager of her son's considerable trust, and she was rediscovering the woman she had been before Liam. With Catherine's encouragement, she enrolled in an online program at Columbia University to finish her PhD in art history. She began consulting for smaller museums and galleries, her passion for art rekindled. One sunny afternoon in early summer, she was sitting on the lawn with Catherine watching 9-month-old Nicholas crawl determinedly through the grass. A letter had arrived that morning from a P.O. box in Pennsylvania. It was from Liam. She hadn't opened it. "Are you going to read it?" Catherine asked gently. Clara looked at the letter, then at her son, his face alight with the simple joy of discovering a dandelion. She thought of the man in the prison cell, the man who had tried to use this beautiful child as a pawn in his desperate game. She felt a pang, not of anger anymore, but of a distant, sad pity. "No," she said, tearing the letter in half and then in half again. "His story is over. Ours is just beginning." She had walked through fire and emerged not scorched but forged. The gilded cage had been destroyed, and in its place she had built a life, a real messy, beautiful, and authentic life. She had lost a millionaire husband, a hollow crown, and a life of luxurious emptiness. And in its place she had found something infinitely more valuable, a loving family, a true home, and most importantly, herself. The future was an unwritten page, and for the first time in a very long time, she was holding the pen. Clara's journey from a humiliated wife in a sapphire gown to a powerful, independent mother is a testament to the incredible strength of the human spirit. She didn't just survive the wreckage of her marriage, she rose from the ashes stronger, wiser, and in control of her own destiny. Her story proves that true power isn't found in billion-dollar bank accounts or public acclaim, but in resilience, integrity, and the unbreakable bonds of family we choose for ourselves. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments we have the power to rewrite our own narrative and build a new, more authentic beginning.